Hey everyone, if you are here, that means that you kind of want to know the setup and you want to know things of that nature. So let's try to keep this brief and a little bit short. Before I dive in, all of this software is going to be listed in the description, and it's very important to note that this isn't a tutorial video. I'm just kind of giving a quick rundown of what I use. I'm not here to teach you how to set up an emulator or troubleshoot a specific problem or to teach you how to set up an overlay. Now keep that in mind. This is just going to be kind of like a basic run through, and let's just dive into the software first. First up, I'm going to cover the universal Pokemon randomizer. This is what 99.9% of people doing solo runs are going to be using. It's very simple to use. At the very basic core, you can just load a ROM, change the starter, save it, and be done with it. I covered this in the Alolan Raichu video that I got it to work for my cross-gen runs, and it does exactly what it says. It makes the text nearly instant, and I think it's kind of a huge quality of life update for playing these games. No one likes to read through single character loading text. It's very annoying, takes a lot of time for no reason at all. If you are comparing your runs, the only thing that you need to know is that you want to do this for every single run to keep things consistent. And let me talk about something else real quick. In the Raichu video, I erroneously stated that it saves you about 11 minutes, but a flat rate, that's not really accurate, and you need to be a little bit more thorough than that. Now, if you like math, then you're going to be glad here because I rounded this to the nearest 100,000ths just to keep the accuracy up. But a regular run without fastest text compared to a fastest text run, the grand total in time for the non-fastest text run is going to be about 91.023% of a regular run in terms of time. This means that you're going to save about 8.977% of time, and the tier list for cross-gen runs is going to be a little bit off for the next several weeks, but it will be corrected later. It's not going to be reflected in the videos coming up, but it is important to note. I did want to talk about fastest text just a little bit, and I'm going to talk about this specific thing in a later video, but another bonus, another benefit of fastest text is it lets you name your Pokemon whatever you want without fear that maybe a longer name could give a Pokemon an advantage, because normally if you're just not using fastest text, you want to keep all your runs the same character limit so that they don't get an advantage. But that's pretty much the long and the short of it. I wanted to just really hammer down on fastest text real quick. I didn't want to spend too much time. Maybe I talked about it too long, but I really did want to get it documented, so let's kind of move on. Next up, we'll cover the emulator. I use Retroarch, and I have an MGBA core. I have heard of some people having some problems with this, but a simple Google search should be able to set you straight. But the main thing that I love about Retroarch is its ability to set a constant frame rate with frame throttle. This means that when I play my gen runs at ×3 speed, or I play a gen 2 run at ×4 speed, they are always at this exact constant speed, and it keeps things consistent between every run I do, and that is going to be the most important thing for setting up a tier list and doing that sort of thing. Now I'm going to mention Gamehook. The very basics here is that you can boot up a ROM in Retroarch, then you can load up the correct mapper, and you can see things such as battle stats, stage modifiers, and even little things like stat experience. And this is really helpful in the ultimate goal of seeing tangible numbers so you can actually optimize a run. Outside of that basic function, Gamehook, it's what allows me to make my overlay. Now, I make my overlay from scratch. It contains several files. It includes things like master list of Pokemon values, move values, several graphics that I've made in Photoshop, and then along with some code that's written in Vue, HTML, CSS. It all works together with Gamehook and OBS to present those values in a vision for what I think works pretty well for my videos. I think I have a pretty nice clean overlay. That's how I do it. I'm not really going to show it here because honestly, it's a little bit complicated. This can be making your own overlay. It can be incredibly daunting if you know nothing about coding, and this is probably not the most accessible thing in the world. I'll say that up front. I would suggest going to the Gamehook Discord, which is the link is found on their website, which is linked in the description, but I'm not going to go over this too much. But Gamehook, along with a little bit of homebrewed wizardry, is what allows the overlay to happen. Next, let's quickly gloss over OBS. This is the recording software, and it's so common and it's really popular. I don't think I have to say much here. I do set up my scenes using the index from the overlay folder. This in tandem with Gamehook does present my current overlay. I just talked about that. But what this all boils down to is this just records my footage for my videos, and it's what I use to set up my streams. That's the long and short of it. And we can go over this next one really quick. This is LiveSplit. This is what speedrunners use to go over their split times, but for my purposes, I generally just use it for a reset counter. I set a keybind in Retroarch that resets the game, and then I use that same exact keybind for the button that increases the counter on the reset to make it really seamless. And then when we get to Gen 2 runs, I do use the real life timer for things like that, but it's pretty straightforward. LiveSplit, link below. Last up is my absolute favorite piece of software. It's called the Pokemon Yellow XP Router, and it's made by Otto. He was a fellow Parasect race participant, and he whipped this up, and it's It's pretty genius, I gotta say. Now don't let the name fool you, because I have been in touch with him for about a year now, testing out various things and requesting some changes for my own personal use. And you can see that this thing can do red, blue, yellow, gold, silver, crystal, and I'm sure one day it'll get that Gen 3 functionality. But this wonderful person also added in the functionality to add in custom stuff, so I can program in my cross-gen runs, and that's how I start to refine those. But let's kind of get down to exactly what it does. Essentially, you can route out a run with this, but that's kind of a misleading statement. It makes it sound like it does all the work for you and you don't actually have to play the run, but that's not the case. There's a feature here where you can set it to record, so when you're doing a blind run, it'll just record the route you took down to some very fine details. And if you're like me, even before this software, I would always jot down the problems from the blind run, and then we would get to work to correct that. And here you can find things like precise experience values, where maybe you wanted to use like a rare candy, and you can find precise damage ranges. So for example, we'll bring up the Ninetales run here. You'll know at this exact level, you can 100% guarantee that you can two-shot the Gyarados, and it just takes a lot of the guesswork out of the planning stages of optimizing. But you still do need to be knowledgeable of the game, and ultimately like the fine-tuning and the refining is up to your ability to kind of see the changes that need to be made. So it's still up to you, it just gives you the tool to make it a little easier. This tool has saved me a lot of time. I don't even know how to quantify how much time, and I don't want to go on a tangent in a video like this, but in the days of old, I would do like a blind run. I would write down the problem areas, then I would do a second playthrough, and in that second playthrough, I'd have like 5 different save files at various points. I'd make several save states, and I would essentially just load and reload over and over to come to the same conclusion that Otto software lets me come to. In something like the old Polyrath video with tons of different move combinations, I did like 5 different playthroughs along with tons of testing, and it ends up taking like 10 to 15 hours, and it almost wasn't worth it. But with this, I can just do one playthrough, write down what I need to change, and I can start to mess with this tool a little bit before doing my second playthrough. And by the time we get to that third playthrough, I can really feel comfortable with the route, and it's great. I can't endorse this enough. Otto, he's the man. And the last thing I'm gonna say about this tool is that honestly, it's just really fun to mess around with. Sometimes when I'm working my real job, I'll just be like, what level can this Pokemon do this? Or how would this Pokemon do? And I'll just mess around and just look at values, because I just have I don't know, this is just my hobby. I just like doing this stuff, I guess what it comes down to. But that's enough of that. Let's not gush too hard. Let's kind of get into the hard rules of the run. First up, I'm going to talk about cross-gen runs. Now, this is neither here nor there, but if you want to play the ROMs that I use in these runs, I am going to be releasing the patch files for members and Patreon soon, so look out for that. But for all intents and purposes, my cross-gen runs, they're exactly the same rules as my regular Gen 1 rules. In the description, I have a couple of decomps that I use as a base for this. Now, there are tutorials built into these decomps if you want to get started doing your own, but what it boils down to is that the only difference in these cross-gen runs versus a regular run is the Pokemon that I'm personally using. Now, it can have new moves, it can have new types, or whatever the case may be, but at the very core of it, the gameplay and the mechanics are exactly the same. So I'm not going to be covering rules here because they're the same as the base red and blue or yellow runs that I do. Now let's talk about the vanilla runs. First and foremost, I do play this game at ×3 speed, set at a consistent rate in Retroarch. As for the blanket rules, the most important thing and the most obvious one is going to be that you can only use your starter in battle. This means that you can't swap them out to get rid of confusion or accuracy debuffs, but that's exactly what it says. You can only use the starter in battle, and that's going to be the core concept of doing a solo run. It goes without saying that you have to use HM users for the run, but they're not going to see battle. And I only bring this up, it's really obvious, because some people, believe it or not, people have told me that it's not a solo run or I'm cheating since I have to use something else for cut, and those people are idiots. I think you guys, if you're clicking on this video, you're smarter than that. I digress. Number 2 is no items in battle. The key thing here is in battle. You can still use potions, vitamins, TMs, or whatever else outside of battle, and it's really just a quality of life thing. It's this for the sake of avoiding tedium. I think this one's pretty self-explanatory. This next one is kind of like a fine line, and this kind of goes into the fact that everyone's going to have their own different set of rules, and it's going to be the no use of skips, exploits, or glitches. The badge boost glitch, it is an exception, and if I remember, I'll have a link to exactly what that is if you don't know, because sometimes people ask me, but if you follow solo run challenges, I think it's really likely probably already know what this is, but to me, the badge boost glitch, it's honestly just like a really fun mechanic that's unique to Gen 1, and even if you wanted to avoid it, it would be really hard to do. When it comes to actual skips and exploits, things like the PokeDOS skip for Pokemon Tower that seemingly every single other channel does, I count that as an exploit. Now again, this is just my preference, but the ability to skip the Rocket Hideout is, to me, it's no different than exploiting the person to leave Pewter City so you don't have to fight Brock. Literally, to me, there's no difference in that. And I think if you want an accurate view of how a Pokemon performs, you need to do the actual full game, because there's some Pokemon, quite a few, that's going to have a tough time with rock and ground types, and giving them like a free pass in the Rocket Hideout is something I don't like. But that's about all there is to say about it. It's my preference. There's no PokeDOS skips in my runs. The final blanket rule is that there's a couple of banned TMs. Double Team and Evasion, in general, those are just kind of problematic. Virtually every Pokemon learns Double Team, and it triggers the badge boost on top of everything else. Now, if this was allowed, I'm pretty sure nearly every single Pokemon, even the really strong Pokemon, would pick this up and abuse it. And it would kind of cause this like little meta where you're just stacking double teams for the badge boost and the evasion bump, and it wouldn't be very engaging to play. It wouldn't be very good to watch. Now, I do allow double team and minimize on runs where a Pokemon learn it naturally. It's part of their kit, and even the best double team or minimize user that we've done to this point, they barely scratched the B tier, so it's nothing like game breaking there. Outside of that, Toxic is banned. This isn't really a good move at all, but this one's banned because it's just really boring. I think stall tactics are not really that fun to play. They often involve like a little bit of luck if you have to use them, and I don't think people enjoy watching them that much. I know I don't like playing them that much. Now, I'm going to talk about Speedrunner0218. He's a friend of the channel. I'm not throwing any shade here at all because he's a good guy. He's a great runner, but he did a Charmander video a while back, and his strat to deal with Gyarados was to use the low accuracy Toxic along with Spire Spin, also a low accuracy move, to cheese past the Gyarados, and he had like 70, 80 resets in that run. Now, as a viewer, as a creator, that doesn't sound very fun to me. It's kind of antithetical to what my rules set up, and I can only imagine what a complete slog that would be to sit through if it was on a live stream. And sorry for using that specific example. Like I said, love Speedrunner, talk to him all the time, but that's just a really good example of why Toxic is just out for me. Now let's go over some little details I can think of, and the first thing is going to be the name of my character and the rival. Since I do custom ROMs, I simply just have the names of myself and the rival already on the list when you start the game, but I do use in-game time for my metric, and it's worth noting, if you never knew this, that the in-game time doesn't start until you shrink down and move into your little room. If you are using fastest text, you can make your name as long and short as you want with no difference, but if you aren't using fastest text, keep the names consistent, or your runs with shorter names will be a little bit faster overall. Now let's cover DVs. Now you can use a tool like PK Hex to set your DVs, but I do use code that's built into my layout that sets the DVs to perfect. If you don't have an overlay, you can simply find the DV values in Gamehook, and you can set them to a value of FF, and you can freeze them, and they'll have the same exact effect. I do think that they'll be imperfect until you level up one time, but it's up to you to decide how to do that. I can't tell you how. I also, when I start the game, I'll start the game up, I'll set a nickname, and I'll freeze that nickname in Gamehook so I don't have to fumble around naming the Pokemon at the start. And this is solely to keep all runs on an even playing field while still letting me use whatever funny nickname that I want to. And this next part's pretty important. It's going to go into some little things that involve a lot of luck and general RNG that I have worked on continuously over the past year to eliminate to keep the runs consistent with each other. The first is solved using code in my layout using Gamehook, and that's solving Surge's trash can puzzle. This thing is, there's no way around it. It's pure luck, and if one run spent like 2 minutes on it, but another one solved it on the first try, it has absolutely nothing to do with the actual Pokemon or their solo running ability. It feels kind of bad. With Gamehook in my code, it's already solved, but if you're playing along with me, I would suggest doing something like this. Maybe use a save state as soon as you step into the gym, then go find the first button, reload that save state, hit the first button, make a save state again, and then reload that save state until you find the second button on the first try. Now this is kind of a little bit of an archaic method, but it is what I used to do all the time for my old runs. But one of these solutions is pretty much the only way to eliminate the pure luck of this section. The second thing I'm going to talk about is catching HM users. In Pokemon Yellow, this isn't that bad. All you got to do is catch a flyer. Everything else is just free. But in Red and Blue, you need either a Paris if you're playing red, or you can get a Sand Sandshrew or a Paris if you're playing the blue version. Now these aren't guaranteed spawns, and just like the trash can puzzle, it's pure luck and it's not indicative of a Pokemon's ability to solo the game. Just like in Surge's puzzle, I used to make a save state here. I would move around until I found a Paris, a Sandshrew, or a Flyer on the very first encounter, and then I would save state again, and I would load it until I caught it on the very first ball. I'd also play blue version pretty much all the time just for that additional Sandshrew chance, because a lot of times you're not going to get lucky on the Paris and you're going to do the same thing there. This would just make it to where catching HM users costs the same amount of time between every single run, and I'm going to repeat this one more time. It helps because it feels really awful if you have these two runs that are really close to each other and the final score is ultimately decided by pure luck, by not being able to find a really quick Paris or having some trouble on Surge's trash can puzzle. I can't stress this enough. Luck is just an inherent part of the game, and I can't deny that. There's going to be luck in every single run that you do, but these things specifically, they're too wild and inconsistent for me to not do anything about. Now, as I've done more and more runs and I got more comfortable tweaking the game code, I've done what I feel eliminates this luck, and I'll talk about what my most recent stream runs have been testing for a while. First off, I have added Master Balls to the Pewter Mart. I guess I could have been a little bit more subtle and just made Pokeballs have a guaranteed catch rate, and I might do that at some point, but what I'm trying to say is still the same. This change by itself means that you don't have to bother with a save state after you encounter the Pokemon, and the original intent was to make the flow of the live stream go smoother, but I went a little bit further than that. I've mentioned Sandshrew being a blue exclusive Pokemon earlier, and it made solo runs on blue version objectively better, but personally, I love to play red version. It's my favorite game. I moved Sandshrew over from blue to red, and in the patch of grass before Cerulean City, I made Sandshrew the only Pokemon that you can encounter, which does two things. It makes it the only Pokemon you can get, and the Master Ball makes that a guaranteed catch, so it makes it really consistent to where you don't have to keep loading save states and worrying if you're going to get lucky, which is what I was doing before anyway. I also made it to where only like birds like Spearow or Pidgey spawn in the patch of grass south of the entrance of Mount Moon, and this achieves the same goal. It'll guarantee that you're going to get the Flyer on the first encounter, and when you combine these two changes along with the Master Ball, I think I've essentially eliminated the RNG of catching HM Pokemon and eliminated the use of several save spots, especially on a live stream, for a consistent and seamless experience. That was really important to me, and I really did need to cover it because I could never talk about that in a regular video, you know what I'm saying? I'm very happy with these changes, and I don't like to change the game too much. A lot of people are like, why don't you just hack in a HM Pokemon from the start? I don't like to change the game that much, but when you're like me and this is a hobby and you only do like a few runs per video, it's nice not to have little trivial things like Surge's puzzle or catching a Pidgey be the things that cost you a lot of time and force you to do another run. Now here's some other things I can think of to fit in here. Blackout grinding, it's allowed. I think the strategic choice of maybe blacking out in a battle to keep the experience is more of a tactic than something that should be banned or force a reset instantly. A great example is something that I love doing in my runs. You've probably seen this a lot. Blackout grinding on the Light Years Junior Trainer and Brock's Gym. Runs with less than ideal early games can take full advantage of beating the Diglett, getting the 50% extra experience trainers provide. You can lose the battle intentionally on the Sandshrew, and you can kind of rinse and repeat this for a much more efficient time rather than just like making the run just a lot slower, just so you can have like this weird sense of pride because you're just beating up level 3 Caterpies. It doesn't make much sense not to do this. It's objectively faster, and I see no reason to ban this sort of thing in my runs. You're pretty much trading in-game time for the blackouts along with money, so I'm fine with it. Not everybody agrees with this, but whose name is on the channel? That's all I gotta say about that. I guess I'll quickly mention the rankings here, and there's two metrics that I use for my runs. I count actual resets when you restart the game and load from a save, and I look at the final in-game time. Now coming up soonish, I'm going to elaborate on the rankings in another video similar to this, but the core of everything I do on the channel is to rank Pokemon, and it's going to be based off of in-game time and resets for Gen 1 games. The last thing to cover is that my timer ends automatically when you return to the overworld map after the champion battle. This is another one of those Gamehook lines of code that's in my overlay, but it just makes me have no guesswork on when the final in-game time was. It helps with accuracy, and I love that. Now you can time your runs however you want, but this is just what I do. It's worth noting that for every single run that I do, regardless of generation, I usually do 3 runs, and that's the max. Now this is just a hobby. I've mentioned this a ton. I just can't sit around and do a million runs, and this felt like the best compromise. Now if you copied my routing and did like 25 Alolan Raichu runs, you could probably definitely squeak out better times, but let's be real, I'm trying to have fun, and at the end of the day, I'm trying not to kill myself doing 55 runs of one Pokemon until every single minute detail is ironed out and it's perfect. I don't have the time for that. But I do think that's a pretty thorough look at Gen 1, and with that groundwork laid down, we can go over Gen 2 real quick. When it comes to Gen 2, a lot of the themes from Gen 1 are going to carry over with a few differences. The first one is that this is a much longer game, so I do use real life time rather than in-game time, and I play the game on ×4 speed rather than ×3. I'll be the first person to say that I don't love real time as a game metric because it puts more emphasis on human error, but I do think it's necessary, at least for the time being, to save some time. The same goes here for Gen 1. I'm going to set the DVs with Gamehook, but you can use PK Hex or whatever I already said. But in Gen 2, it's just different because you might need different combinations of DVs because you might need a specific hidden power type, and that coverage is going to be very valuable to the run here. I went into depth about catching HM users and keeping things consistent and eliminating some of the luck for Gen 1, but in Pokemon Crystal, there's really no issues here. You can actually make it really consistent, and I'm not throwing any shade here at anybody else, but I think that if you pause the timer, I think it's a pretty weak solution, and it's just not something I'm interested in doing. I think there's a fine line on if you're doing an actual speed run or if you're doing like a casual frolic through the field, but I do think that pausing the timer for any reason at all kind of compromises the balance too much. The only real coding I use for Gen 2 is that I can set the day of the week so that we can utilize various held items for the runs. I get that this might be a point of contention, but the alternative is watching every single run forced to be done on Sunday because return is too good to pass up, and you would just miss out. You would never see certain held items ever in any single run. One last thing I'm going to talk about, and this is a plague, it's a pandemic in the Gen 2 solo run scene. It's the use of curse. Seriously guys, if you go to the YouTube search bar and you type in Pokemon Crystal solo run, I guarantee you that 3 or 4 out of the top 5 results will have curse on the final learn set. Just fast forward to the end of the video and just have a look. It's unreal. This is just like Double Team and Toxic from Gen 1. Curse is an unimaginative, boring, and overall cop-out way to beat red, and as a viewer, I think it's incredibly anticlimactic when runs resort to this, and I can't change how someone else does their runs. I don't care to, but I can change mine. So in my runs, I want to experiment and face red without the constraints of time so that we can actually sit down, take a deep look, and find out what a consistent red fight looks like without cheesy strategies. Now to implement this, I end my runs, I end the timer at the blue fight. That's where the times will be for my runs, and then we go to red and we figure out the learn set and the level that you would need to make it consistent. And if you've seen runs like Steelix, you can see that it's not always easy to do. You have to go into the mid 90s to even get past it. So the combination of the red fight and the final time from blue, that forms the rankings on these Gen 2 runs. I do count resets, but resets in real life time, they're just kind of baked into that. So we do keep track of them, but the penalty is already in the time. So I think that wraps up Gen 2. It's pretty straightforward, and it's a consistent run to get working right out of the box compared to Gen 1. And like I said, a lot of philosophies that I use for Gen 1 do carry over into Gen 2, but I think we got it covered. I think you're good. Now, as of the time writing this, I don't have any huge plans to make like a Gen 3 overlay, and I really haven't learned those games at a high enough level, but maybe I will one day. But for now, I'm fine with where we're at. We got like a million combinations of different runs to do to keep us busy, and this should be kind of like a nice rundown of all of that. And I'm not going to keep you guys any longer. Now, if you have any non-tutorial based questions, I'm happy to elaborate on something, but that's pretty much it for me. This has been a general rundown of what I use, maybe a little bit of insight to my thought process for the runs, and that's pretty much it. I guess I'll catch you guys later. Bye.